Okay, so we're going to start. Vamos a empezar. Mil gracias para venir. Es muy tarde, entonces muchas gracias. Thank you very, very much for being here. We are going to be together for about half an hour to 45 minutes. Vamos a hacer juntos para como tipo 45 minutos máximo, porque es muy tarde. And the idea is that you meet our two guests. Okay, la idea es que se van a encontrar nuestros invitados. So thank you very much for having come. Okay, our two guests. How are you?
I'm fine, are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So we know some of them, we don't know some of them, so I will just introduce everybody. And then after that, a few questions so that we all meet each other. And then if you have questions, of course, you don't hesitate, okay? I will be speaking in English. Because I have nothing to say, so I'll just say it in English. And two people with us. Two people. It's great to have you both. Ladies first. I'll start with Jesús. Jesús Marchamalo. So you are a writer. You are a journalist. You live in Madrid. Yeah?
Yes.
Yes?
You
still live in Madrid, yes?
Yes. Yesterday I lived in Madrid.
Okay, you were in Madrid yesterday.
Today I'm thinking about travel to Dublin.
Okay. We'll talk to journalists about it. We'll try to do something about it. So we know you from the Spanish literary and critical panorama because a large part of your career was at Radio Nacional de España, at Televisión Española as well, and of course for 8 seasons of Al Habla. Mm-hmm. So, but you're not just a journalist, you're also a writer. And I'm not going to list all of your books, 20 of them, so no. But the connection between all of them is that they are, many of them are dedicated to topics related to reading, to libraries, to literature. And this is why this place is absolutely wonderful for us. So we could mention Tocar los libros, las bibliotecas perdidas también, as well, Cortázar. Of course, El Libro de Miguel Delibes, and of course, a series of illustrated biographies of contemporary writers. And so amongst these writers, we could see Baroja, Pessoa, Kafka, Karen Blixen, Virginia Woolf, Stephen Zweig, and so on and so forth. So your world is the world of words, but also the world of the arts. And this is also why we are here together. You curated a dozen exhibitions, amongst other Delibes in 2020 for the National Library of Spain. And you're also collaborating at the moment on the R&E programs Gente Despierta y El Ojo Crítico. Et in French, we say J'en passe des meilleurs. So, and for that, you have been awarded a huge amount of extremely well-deserved prizes, and I'm sure that there will be many others, including El Premio Ícaro de Periodismo, El Premio Banco de Libro de Venezuela, and so on and so forth. And I know it can get very embarrassing when people are talking about what you're doing, so I'll stop there, but thank you very, very much for being here, and thank you for the moment that we're going to spend together when you are going to talk with Cristín Leach. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah?
Yes.
So the Irish audience will know Cristín, of course. You kind of started very young.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of started very young. You've been on the scene for a very long time. You worked for the RT Guide as one of their young book reviewers, and this was lovely when I was reading about this. You started at age 8. So, you went towards radio, so you started radio with East Coast FM?
Yeah. Reading the news,
which led you to getting a position with RT Online in 1998. You led the first online art identity for RT Interactive as well, so that was very interesting, which featured original video content in 2001, I think, And then in 2003, you began working for the Sunday Times Ireland edition, and since then you've served as the paper's longest-running art critic.
In Ireland.
In Ireland. But still, While working for the Sunday Times, you also worked as an on-screen and on-air reporter and presenter. So you're dabbling and working in many different fields. For the non-Irish audience or people who might not know Cristín, you're a regular panelist and you have produced art programs for both TV and radio. This is why you were shortlisted for the Critic of the Year award in 2018, and this is also why your radio show, Through the Canvas, won silver in the New York Festival. And you occasionally work as the curator of art exhibitions in Ireland, of course. And we can hear Cristín on The Works, The View, Arena, and again, like for his books, J'en passe et des meilleurs, we have a huge list, Rattlebag, Into the Evening, and everything. But there is another interesting thing. You jumped another world, and you entered into that world with Negative Space, which is a collection of personal essays, very personal essays, which completely blend art criticism with life, really. Okay, and it came out in 2022, so just now. It's
just
still
in June. Yeah,
it still smells
it's
good.
Very fresh. Yes.
It's very fresh. So my first question to the two of you: if we think of cats in terms of cats' lives, okay, that's about 9 lives here, 9 lives here, 18 lives at least. Okay, so. In all those 18 lives, why did you decide to come here today? Because you don't have time.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah.
I'm here to talk about writing and art. I'm here because I'm interested in the intersection between those things, I suppose. And a lot of the themes in my book are about, that line between seeing something and putting words on it, and private and public selves too. And also the role of the journalist and the role of the critic. And then I suppose, as you said, art being a huge, important part of my life, but also because my mum is an artist, I grew up going to exhibitions, and it never seemed to me that art was separate to life. It's not a it's not some separate thing. So that's, here to talk about those things, yeah.
Buenas tardes a todos, un placer de nuevo reencontrarnos. Mucho de nosotros. Ya he dejado de ser maestro de ceremonias y ya soy una persona normal esta tarde.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see you again, some of you. Today I am not a master of ceremonies.
¿Qué hacemos aquí? Bueno, es el último lugar en Dublín que nos quedaba por visitar hoy. Llevamos recorriendo Dublín desde las 10 de la mañana y Dublín puede ser un lugar verdaderamente extenuante.
So we're here because this is the last place of Dublin that remained for us to see. We've been walking around since 10 in the morning and this is the last place. And I tell you, it can be tiring.
Hemos estado paseando, hemos recorrido Dublín, hemos visto a Wilde, nos hemos encontrado con Joyce, hemos comprado jabón en la farmacia, han tocado una guitarra, una canción para nosotros y hemos estado toda la tarde aquí.
We walked around, met Wilde, met Joyce, bought some soap in a chemist, heard someone playing the guitar and then decided to come here.
Y en todo caso, para saludarte, Jean-Philippe, un honor para estar con Cristín y con todos ustedes, por supuesto, encantado.
Of course, to say hello to you, to say hello to Cristín, and to be here with all of you.
And was the city like a museum for you today? La ciudad fue como un museo para ti hoy.
Sí, una especie de parque temático, ¿no? Dublín en 24 horas, ¿no? Sí, es verdad. Sí.
It was like a thematic park, like a theme park, Dublin in 24 hours.
Do you sometimes see cities as museums?
Ooh.
I know, just now at 18.
Interesting question. Gosh, maybe. What I do find, because I've spent 20 years looking at art, I find that when I look at real life, I often see paintings or art. I don't know if you don't need to translate it, but so I went to see the Turner exhibition in the National Gallery this afternoon, and And then I was in Clontarf to meet a friend for a walk. The sun was setting. It was like a Turner painting, right? So art, the world, life, you know, it's all together.
Yeah.
No he pedido disculpas por hablar español. Mi inglés no está ni de lejos a la altura de las circunstancias, de modo que he decidido ahorrarles mis tropezones con el inglés.
So first of all, I forgot to apologize for not speaking English. My English is not up to the right level for being here, so I thought I'll spare you my broken English.
Es una pregunta interesante. ¿Vemos las ciudades como si fueran museos? ¿En qué medida vemos el mundo, ese mundo ajeno, como si fuera un museo? Y la verdad que ahora que por primera vez lo pienso, me da la impresión de que el mundo se ha convertido en un lugar museable para todos nosotros y que visitamos las ciudades efectivamente como si fueran museos y no me convence del todo.
The world seems to have turned. Sorry.
Interesting question whether cities are museums. I actually never thought about that, but I think cities and the world at large, they are like museable. They become like museums, and maybe we do look at them as if they were museums.
He leído que por primera vez en Venecia se va a empezar a pagar por llegar a la ciudad. De hecho, quiero decir que los propios venecianos han entendido que su ciudad de alguna manera es un museo y hay que pagar para entrar a la ciudad.
I've heard that Venice is going to start charging for tourists when tourists come into the city. So obviously people from Venice have understood that their city is like a museum and they're going to charge for visiting it.
We forgot to charge them. We'll have to do something about it. But,
I think as well about Dublin, it's appeared in so much literature that when you walk around Dublin, you feel like you're walking through books. If you've read books, that Dublin is a character. Dublin is the city is a character in so much writing, right? So that's another thing.
And earlier on, you were talking about intersections. Okay, so you both, and this is a question, my questions are to both people, and you really answer whomever you want, okay? You both have different roles and different positions in your respective cultural worlds. How would you describe the interplay between these different roles? You're a journalist, you're an art critic, you're a writer, you're a journalist, you're a writer, how do you connect all these things? Or do you?
Yeah, I have to apologise also for my Spanish because I don't speak Spanish, so don't feel bad. Okay, so I think the first chapter of my book is called Writing, and there's a reason that that's the opening chapter, because for me, putting words on experiences, on the world, on how I feel, is something that I started when I was very young. So journalism is also writing, even radio broadcasting is putting words, on visuals or... it's telling stories. So for me, there's a flow between them. You're right in saying this is a move into something else because it's a book, but in many ways, it's just more writing. It's just a different shape, Yeah.
Si he entendido bien, creo que vamos a contar lo mismo. Para mí no hay tanta diferencia entre ser periodista, ser escritor, ser comisario de exposiciones sobre escritores. Son finísimas líneas casi invisibles las que separan estos trabajos, ¿no?
I think if I understood right that I'm going to answer along your lines. To me, there's no difference between being a writer, being a journalist, being a curator. The lines that separate it are very, very fine.
Hay más diferencia entre trabajar en un periódico y en una televisión que entre trabajar en un periódico y escribir un libro, sin duda.
I think the difference between working on television or being a journalist who writes in a paper is greater than the difference between being a writer and a journalist.
Pero hay una frase que a mí me gusta mucho de Víctor García de la Concha, fue el director de la Real Academia Española.
There's a sentence I like a lot, which is by Víctor García de la Concha. He was the director of the Royal Spanish Academy.
Contaba que muchas especies son capaces de comunicar cosas, ¿no? Las abejas, los delfines, pero que las palabras eran patrimonio de los humanos. Nos comunicamos con palabras, definimos nuestro mundo, hablamos de él, lo medimos con palabras, y en todos estos trabajos que has mencionado, el sujeto que utilizas en la radio, en la tele, en los periódicos, es la palabra, con lo cual digamos que trabajamos con el mismo producto para entendernos.
And he says that different beings communicate. Bees communicate, plants communicate, but the one thing that is specific to humans is that we use words to communicate. Words define our world, words measure our world, and it is words that we use when we are writers or journalists.
I think something else, and it's pertinent to this conversation, is as a journalist, you are telling other people's stories. And then if you write a memoir, you're telling your own story. So that is a threshold to cross, you know. And also the difference is the audience that you're speaking to. So if you write for a newspaper, and I'm writing for a Sunday supplement, a Sunday newspaper. So this is something to be written for someone with a cup of coffee on a Sunday, reading the magazine. That is something different to what you might write in a different context. So the language, the tone of voice changes, you know. But again, it's all telling a story, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So another thing that we're going to try to enter into your worlds from the different... I'm French, so I like little boxes. I'm very narrow-minded, so I apologize. Yo soy francés, entonces me excusa.
Ordenado.
Lo siento, pero... so let's start. You're both art critics, okay? You're both art critics. You respond to, you interpret meaning, you make critical judgments about specific works of art, okay? And it can be very subjective. From your perspective, and our reading of your critique can be very subjective. So there is a notion of power. Mm-hmm. So do you feel you have power as an art critic? And how do you take that into account in your work?
Do you want to answer that first?
Oye, me encanta porque habla un inglés tan bueno que estoy empezando a entenderlo. O sea, me voy a ir también. Me ha pasado lo mismo.
I love this. Her English is so clear that I'm beginning to understand it.
Yeah. Miracle. No me siento en absoluto poderoso. Tengo además la certeza de que cada vez la influencia, que se dice ahora, es un territorio más caprichoso y más accidental.
I do not feel powerful at all. I actually think that influencing, such a trendy term now, is becoming more capricious and more accidental.
Yo recuerdo, como ya tenemos una edad muy mala, que cuando empezábamos en el periodismo había periodistas y medios que sí tenían influencia. Salir, por ejemplo, en El País, en Babelia, significaba no vender 3.000 libros, pero sí tener una cierta resonancia social.
So there was a time when journalists were, or people who were on television, were powerful. To feature in El País definitely gave you power. You might not sell 3,000 books, but you had power.
Yo creo que todo eso se ha perdido. Antes de la pandemia, yo saqué un libro que salió reseñado y ese día firmaba en la feria y entonces pregunté, digo, oye, ¿se ha notado que he salido en los periódicos?
So I think that's something that's lost. Before the pandemic, I published a book. I was signing the book in a fair, and there was people coming to get the signature, and I thought, you can tell that I've been in the newspapers.
Y entonces me dijeron, bueno, no te puedes imaginar cómo ha sido esta mañana, las solicitudes nos han llovido, hemos tenido que ir a buscar libros a la editorial porque no habíamos traído suficiente y fueron extendiendo los elogios.
And I was told, well, you cannot believe the amount of people who were interested in coming here today. We did not have enough books. We had to go and get more for you to sign. And they continue praising me.
Y preguntaron, ¿cuántos hemos vendido, Javier? Y dijo Javier, 7.
And they asked, Javier, how many did we sell? And Javier replied, 7.
Pero con entusiasmo, dijo 7, porque era el doble que habían vendido en todos los días de feria.
And he was enthusiastic because it was double the amount that they had sold all throughout the fair.
Esto seguir así, vamos a tener que reimprimir el libro, ¿no?
So things being as they are, we're going to have to press that book again.
Quiero decirte, ese es el mundo del que estamos hablando. Hay una serie de libros que venden miles de ejemplares a cambio de que hay un seguramente 80-90% de títulos de libros que venden apenas unos centenares de ejemplares, ¿no? No me siento en absoluto poderoso, en absoluto. Creo que además que con razón.
So that's the reality. There are few books that sell thousands of copies, and then about 80-90% only sell a very few copies. So I do not feel powerful at all.
It's a strange position to be in because for artists to have somebody write about your work is really important, and because so many exhibitions happen that get no media coverage, and once the show is over, it's gone. There may be a catalogue or something as a record, but to have a critic write about your work, even if it's not favourable, is still a document, you know. So in that way, I suppose there's a power in that, but then artists often don't understand the commissioning procedure within newspapers. I'm a freelance journalist, I'm not a staff journalist. I pitch ideas to a commissioning editor. The editor says yes or no. There may be an exhibition I would like to write about that the editor says, no, I'm going to cover that one. You know, so the power is there, you know, in different ways. And then also as a writer, if you thought about how what you were writing would land with the artist or how it would affect them, you wouldn't be able to do an honest job. So you have to put that aside and just engage with the work and do the work. So in a way, critics have some power. In another way, people aren't buying newspapers anymore. So there's also a question of who's reading this work, you know, and what value does it have in different worlds? It has value in the art world, value for the artists, value for art historians in the future. And the media is changing all the time. There's less art criticism being published in Ireland now than ever before. So, yeah, so it's, some people call it a dying profession. We need to translate that. Are we okay? Yeah.
Todos saben
Is it
inglés.
okay?
Everybody can speak English, excepto yo.
Tell me if you need to translate it. I'll be really clear.
Cada vez es
You talked about honesty. I still haven't understood how this but you're talking about honesty, okay? And it's very important. And honesty, if we shift toward your other type of work, which is journalism. You're both journalists as well as being both art critics. Honesty, ethics, there's something there. What role do you ascribe to ethics in journalism? I know it's a big one, but ¿cómo se encargan de ética en el mundo del periodismo?
Ha dicho la palabra.
Ha dicho la palabra.
He said the word. Ethic in the journalist. Ethic in journalism. What about this?
And the door is closed.
Siempre me anticipo tontamente, porque me encantaría escuchar para decir algo parecido. A ver,
He wants to listen to you in order to say the
Ay,
same.
perdona.
It's okay.
Es la gran palabra, ¿no? La ética, el compromiso con la verdad, ¿cómo se llama esto? Ser equidistante, ¿no? Claro, tú cuentas, a ver, situémonos primero en la generalidad. En este mundo que vivimos puedes ser, puedes tener una ética intachable. No sé si aquí, y así pienso lo que voy a continuar diciendo.
So it's a pity that you didn't go first, because then maybe I could copy what you were going to say. But look, I don't know why I started first. So ethics, yeah. As journalists, we have to have commitment to the truth. We have to keep in the middle. And I think you left it at that. So.
Una vez fui a un congreso donde hablábamos de la crítica. ¿Podemos ser veraces, sinceros, haciendo crítica de libros? El periodismo es uno de los trabajos peor pagados que yo conozco. Hay periodistas a quienes pagan 20, 30 euros por una página de un periódico en España, en Madrid. 20, 30 euros.
So I was in a congress once, and we were talking about, can you be honest if you are a book critic? Actually, journalists get paid very, very little. I know journalists who get paid 20, 30 euro for one page of the newspaper.
Calculen el número de páginas que tienes que firmar al mes para conseguir un salario con el que puedas alquilar una casa y pide a ese periodista no solo honestidad, sino que además se tome en serio su trabajo, se documente, lea los libros que va a comentar, baje a las librerías a ver cuál es la oferta que hay, etcétera, que es el trabajo que eso requiere.
So imagine the amount of articles that person has to write in order to make a living, to rent a place. And on top of that, we ask them to be honest, to document themselves, to go down and buy books, to keep it on top of all affairs.
Y hablaba de estos viajes que hacen las editoriales para presentar un libro. Un libro transcurre en San Petersburgo. Pues cogen a 15 periodistas y les pagan un viaje a San Petersburgo de 4 días. Eso ocurre con las grandes novelas, los grandes lanzamientos, ¿no?
So in this Congress, we were talking about how journalists are taking, the launching of a book. When a book is launched, if it's set in St. Petersburg, for example, they hire 15 journalists, they fly them to St. Petersburg to write about the launch of the book.
¿Y te dan de comer?
And they feed you.
Entonces, ¿quién de esos 20 periodistas va a volver a decir que vaya basura de libro que han escrito sobre San Petersburgo y que no les ha gustado nada y que no les ha interesado?
So do you think any of those journalists is going to say that that book is rubbish and they don't like it at all?
A mí me da la impresión de que hacemos una especie de periodismo de agencia y muchas veces te sientes utilizado por las editoriales, ¿no? Solamente recibimos algunos libros. Hablamos de esos pocos libros que recibimos porque son los libros que tenemos para hablar de ellos. No tenemos tiempo para buscar otros libros. En medio de eso, te digo, plantearse la posibilidad de la ética, es un poco lo que estamos preguntando, pues te digo que es muy, muy como accidental, ¿no? Es decir, esto que hacemos es ético, esto lo que hacemos es lo que hay, es la manera que tenemos de trabajar.
So I think what we do is agency journalism. We sometimes feel used by publishers. Se me olvidó la última parte que has dicho.
Pues imagínate a mí. No, hablaba, me da un apuro tremendo porque estoy como usurpando tiempo de Cristín. No, decía que al final es que no tienes muchas posibilidades de pensar.
Basically what happens is that we only read the books we're given to read and review. We don't have the time to choose them. We don't have a say on what we're going to review. So at the end of the day, we just handed these books to review.
Y simplemente para terminar, a pesar de todo eso, yo creo que sí hay un compromiso con la verdad. Yo jamás hablo bien de un libro que no me ha gustado y lo que suelo hacer cuando un libro no me gusta es eludirlo, no hablar de él, ¿no? Quiero decir que a pesar de eso sí que hay un compromiso.
In spite of all of that, I think people are honest, and I always say it when I don't like a book. And if I have to say something that's not pleasant, maybe I just try and avoid saying anything about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I remember when I started writing for the Sunday Times, I went to Limerick to see an exhibition, and I was on the phone to my editor afterwards and I said, oh, I met the director of the gallery. He bought me a cup of tea. And my editor said, never accept a cup of tea from the director of the gallery. He was really unhappy about this. And I was thinking, he can't buy my review with a cup of tea. So, but I had some early lessons in what that editor thought was acceptable and not acceptable. Now, you were definitely not paid well enough to be held to that standard. Yeah. But I think over 20 years doing this work, in the very beginning as well, that particular editor told me if I wrote a catalogue essay for an artist or a gallery, he would not commission me again to write reviews. He had very high standards. Now, if you're going to keep doing this work for 20 years, you need to do other work that also pays. Yeah. And the world is very small. So there's this balance between retaining independence, being respected for your opinion and your voice, and also paying the bills, right? So it's not easy. I wish that there were staff jobs for critics. I would love to have 40 hours of the week to look at all the art and then decide what to write about. Those jobs don't exist anymore. That's an old world of journalism. Maybe in America there are a few of them. In Ireland there aren't. Maybe in the UK, I don't know what it's like in Spain.
In France a little bit.
In France a little bit, yeah. But it's dropping all the time, right? Yeah. So these are cost cutting in the media, less people buying newspapers, all of these things. So I worry about cultural criticism as a practice across books, film, theatre, music, everything, because I think a healthy professional practice of cultural criticism is an essential part of a functioning society. It's as important as the creative work. It's necessary for art to be made and for cultural criticism to be produced. It's so essential. And also, the fewer voices we have, the less variety of opinion, which is terrible. There's no diversity of opinions being published. So not only do you have artists whose work never gets written about or books that appear that don't get reviewed, you also then have just the same voices all the time, right? Which isn't healthy or good either. So I don't know the answer to this, but it's definitely a problem. And then around ethics, like I did a master's in journalism. That's how I became a journalist. We studied ethics as a module, ethics. And it goes very quickly to the question of truth and honesty. And I think that's so interesting because truth is a very weighty word right now, right? Fake news, all of this, right? And so there's a lot around that. And then when it comes to, like, say, for example, writing this memoir, I had to decide, because I do write a little bit about being a journalist and the question of whether to put yourself in the story or not, I had to give myself permission to own my truth to write this book. And to understand that there are other truths that also exist, they coexist, right? Which is kind of the opposite of being a journalist. If you're a journalist, you go to find the truth, right? But actually, the world is full of truths from different perspectives. And that's also true within journalism. You're telling one story within the story. There are other stories, so that's... That's another... It's a very big question, right? You want to say something?
No, tienes razón. Creo que más que hablar de ética, tienes que hablar de honestidad. Es una palabra parecida, pero no es la misma, ¿no?
I think you're right. I think rather than talking about ethics, maybe we should talk about honesty. It is similar concepts, but they're not the same.
Or the word integrity. What's integrity in Spanish?
Integridad, sí.
Yeah.
Es decir, he contado mi verdad. Hay otras verdades, pero esta es la mía, pero al menos es una verdad. No estás... Me parece importante, ¿no?
And we have to make sure that we know we're telling our truth. There are other truths, but what I am saying is truth, and we have to be satisfied that that's the case.
Yeah.
And talking about integrity, this is a question that we mentioned earlier on in your book. When I read it, you mix your views, your techniques, your knowledge about journalism, and then you also go towards extremely private moments of your life, which involve family members and so on and so forth, and like personal matters, divorce and so on and so forth. Was there some sort of hesitation before starting this? I mean, obviously there is integrity toward yourself. I, as a woman, want to say that, but you're not saying it to the neighbor. You're saying it to Ireland or to. So.
Well, I'll tell you, the book is about 40,000 words long, and the document I had was 50,000, and I took 10,000 words out. So I made very clear decisions about what to take out. You're right, some of it is very intimate and personal, but I knew that to tell a story that rang true, that felt honest, I had to include some of that. You can't hide, so I feel the book has integrity and I can stand beside it, and that's really all I can say. But also, I'm very grateful to my family and the people around me because they trusted me to tell my own story, and it is just my story. It's not anyone else's story. And I think that's all you can say. That's all you can do, right?
And what's very interesting is that us as readers, we're curious and we want to know Cristín Leach and we want to go, but we're never voyeurs because you put us in a situation where you both tell us the story and reflect about it in a very what's the adjective for integrity? You do it with loads of integrity, actually.
Good.
There is no need of, I'm going to go in. So that it's very well done, but I was, it takes courage. Were you afraid?
It was just about finding the right voice. Once I found the voice, I knew how to tell the story. So I would say most of the work was before the writing. Most of the work was what part of the story can I own? What is the voice to tell it? And how will I be comfortable putting the pieces into the world that I've chosen to? So I think the labour was in doing that, and I didn't really sit down to write until I knew that. Because I could have written lots of words I would have had to throw away if the voice was wrong. So that would have been a waste of my time. And I'm a journalist, I don't have much time. So I told my editor in the Sunday Times, I said, I'm not going to write anything for 6 weeks. I have to write this book. So I made the manuscript happen in 6 weeks because, you're not earning any money. I was like, what? I don't have time to spend more time writing this book. But in another way, it took me 46 years to write it because it's the story of my life in a way. It does go back to me being 8, writing book reviews, so yeah.
And you're writing a lot about other people and biographies about other people. So how much of your own writing about others is about yourself? ¿Cuántos de lo que escribes de los otros
tiene que ver.
tuyo?
Al hilo de lo que contestaba Cristín, en el mundo anglosajón hay una diferencia muy radical entre la ficción y la no ficción. En las librerías hay un ala de ficción y un ala de no ficción y está claro de qué estamos hablando.
In the Anglo-Saxon world, there's a very clear distinction between fiction and non-fiction. In bookshops, you can see the sections, fiction, non-fiction.
El problema a veces es dónde colocar el libro, pero no toda vez que está colocado sabes a dónde vas.
The problem then is finding out where the book should go. Fiction or non-fiction.
Yeah. Entonces, en España últimamente hemos hablado mucho de la autoficción. Es un género de moda. Vilamatas escribe autoficción, Miguel Ángel Hernández escribió sobre un asesinato en su infancia. Hay un libro terrible, maravilloso, que acaba de salir, donde un autor, no recuerdo el nombre, habla sobre el maltrato que durante... Miguel Ángel Oeste, es un libro sobrecogedor donde explica cómo su padre era un maltratador, maltrató a su madre, maltrató a sus hermanos, a él mismo. Esto es de lo que vengo de este infierno, o algo así se titula.
In Spain at the moment, self-fiction is a new trend. Is very strong at the moment. People like Vilamatas, Miguel Ángel Hernández, they're all writers. And there's a book by a guy called Miguel Ángel Oeste, and he writes about abuse, about his story, how his father was abused, members of their family was abused. He's telling his truth.
Y hay dos sensaciones cuando lees este tipo de literatura. Una, yo siempre pienso en la familia del protagonista, cómo se ve reflejada como un personaje en un libro, y de otra parte, leer algo que sabes que es verdad, creo que le da un valor, una credibilidad, algo especial, una emoción especial. Cuando yo he leído este libro del maltrato, ves la foto del autor, yo no le conozco al autor en persona, pero ves su foto, sabes que está contando algo que es verdad y de alguna manera esa certeza de que lo que cuenta es verdad dota a la lectura de una emoción especial.
So there's a feeling about there's a double sense feeling about books like that, about self-fiction. On the one hand, you think of the family as a character, and I often think, I wonder, the family, how does it sit there? And then also there is, when you're reading the truth, you see it gives a credibility. It is truth, and it has a certain emotion attached to it. It infuses it with emotion. When I look at the picture of this author who writes about the abuse in his family, and you see his picture, and you look at the picture and you think, I know this is truth, and it really feels the emotion looking at him and knowing that that's a true story.
Hay un escritor guatemalteco, se llama Eduardo Halfon, que hace una literatura de lo autobiográfico. Habla de su familia, habla de sus abuelos, habla de un abuelo judío que estuvo en Auschwitz, en el campo de concentración de Auschwitz, y por tanto tenía el número tatuado en el antebrazo. Y el pequeño Halfon preguntaba a su abuelo que qué era el número que tenía, y el abuelo le decía, mira, como tengo la cabeza tan mal, se me olvida el teléfono, así que me lo he puesto aquí para que no se me olvide nunca a dónde tengo que llamar.
There's an author from Guatemala called Eduardo Harfon, and he writes about his family, his grandfather, and specifically about his Jewish grandfather who was in Auschwitz in the concentration camp. And he had the tattoo of the number tattooed in his arm. And when little Eduardo used to ask him, what is that number? The grandfather used to say, you know, I forget everything, so I thought I'll write my phone number here so I won't forget it.
Cuando él presentó este libro en Madrid, hubo un momento en que explicó que era una autobiografía, pero que en el momento en que lo novelaba dejaba de ser realidad para convertirse todo en ficción. Cualquier cosa que introduces en una novela pasa a ser ficción.
So when he presented this book in Madrid, he was saying that this is it was an autobiography, but when an autobiography is published as a novel, it goes from being truth to being fiction. Every autobiography eventually turns into fiction.
Y hubo como una decepción generalizada. De repente aquello que nos había contado podía no ser verdad, podía no ser del todo cierto, podía haber ficcionado a partir de aquello, y en ese momento de decepción hubo una voz que detrás de mí le preguntó, ¿pero la historia de tu abuelo y el teléfono es verdad o no es verdad? Y es importante saber qué es verdad de un libro y qué es literatura, porque tienes una relación diferente con la verdad que con la literatura, al menos desde mi punto de vista.
And when he said that, there was a general disappointment. People were wondering, I wonder what parts are true, which ones aren't. And eventually someone in the public said, but is the story about your grandfather and the telephone, the tattoos and number in his arm, is that true? And the thing is that it's important to know whether something is true or is fiction. We do have different relationships with texts that are truth and texts that are fiction.
Mm. And journalists should not write fiction, right? So, you know, journalism cannot be fiction, right? So that's also a line to cross, you know, and autofiction is very interesting because it's personal, you know, and I think as well, you know, for women as well, often stories that can't be told maybe get told in fiction, like you can hide it in this veil, and that's another interesting thing. But then a lot of women who are writing, when they write fiction, people say, oh, that must really be true. So then it's like a disrespect for the practice of producing fiction. So you can tell a story, you may fictionalize it, and it may tell a bigger truth, you know, because of how you've shaped it. It may have a more true meaning to the reader, you know, the story.
You must have been listening to France Culture this morning, because there is a huge... Yeah, I'm sure you did. No, they have a huge debate at the moment with Annie Ernaux and the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
Just because she's a woman and just because she's sitting in between fiction and autofiction, they're all jumping out of the window at the moment. And they're forgetting that she's a writer, first and foremost.
So you could say, as a writer, you could say, does it matter? Or do the words ring true? Does this say something to you as a reader? Isn't that the important thing? You know, but it is interesting when you come from a journalism background, because I have written short stories too, so I have written fiction, and it was like a leap for me to say, I can just make this up. You can't make it up when you're doing. And also, as a journalist, every single line, we still have sub-editors in the Sunday Times. It goes through 2 different sub-editors. They check the facts. It's fact-checked. So fiction isn't fact-checked. And actually, a memoir isn't, because it's your story, right? So nobody is going fact-checking through this, right? So these are really interesting kind of spaces to move between, especially when you've trained as a journalist, which is I must have evidence for every sentence, right?
Oye, y hay una historia importante. Antes nos preguntabas respecto de la escritura de libros, el periodismo, la radio, la televisión. Te decía que hay líneas muy invisibles, pero hay una línea que no hay que cruzar nunca en el periodismo, que es la línea de inventártelo. En una novela puedes inventar, construir personajes, historias, da igual, pero por supuesto en el periodismo no. Hay casos, y nos dejan consternados, de periodistas que se han inventado una entrevista, que se han inventado una situación. No sé si han leído a Kapuczynski, y paro aquí.
Espérate que escribe a Kapuczynski. So you were asking us earlier about being a writer, being a journalist, being working on TV, on the road, and I was saying that the lines are very fine to separate all of those endeavours, but there is a red line that must never be crossed, and that is a journalist inventing something, making up. When they're writing journalism, like there have been cases of journalists inventing an interview. There was a guy called Kapuczynski.
Kapuczynski es un periodista formidable, maravilloso, polaco, del que leímos deslumbrados Ébano, imagino que estará traducido, se lo recomiendo, es su experiencia como reportero en África. Tiene un libro maravilloso que se llama El Imperio, El Emperador, El Shah, no me acuerdo de otros títulos. Y nos enamoramos de Kapuczynski, todos queríamos escribir como Kapuczynski, hasta que nos enteramos de que no siempre era capaz de frenar su ímpetu literario y que había cosas que no necesariamente eran como había ocurrido.
Pero era literatura lo que estaba escribiendo.
No
esos títulos no son de literatura.
Era, claro. Okay. Ese es el territorio.
Okay. So there's this guy, there's a journalist from Poland called Kapuczynski, and he's a fantastic writer. We all loved him, and he was publishing these books, Ébano, El Imperio, all these books that we absolutely loved. Now the idea is that they were true, but we found out that he was actually making up some of these stories.
Es decir, si yo escribo una biografía de Karen Blixen, elijo qué episodios de su vida para mí construyen su mundo, pero no puedo inventarme algo que realmente no ocurrió. Esa frase terrible del periodismo, no dejes que la verdad te fastidie una buena historia, creo que es una frase que debería aterrarnos a todos.
So that sentence, don't let the truth spoil a good story, is something that we should really keep in mind, all of us. If you're writing a book about Karen Blixen, for example, you can interpret the world. If you're writing a biography, you can interpret how you present the truth, but you cannot invent.
Okay, inventing, thinking, that leads me probably to my last question because of the time. I'm really sorry. My last question is going to be for you, Cristín. Connecting everything with the title of your book, Negative Space. There is something in what he was saying that is...
There are some layers to the title of the book. One is quite literally that idea of negative space when somebody is drawing, that they might draw around the edge, to draw the space between the object and the rest of the world. There's also, this describes a pretty stressful time in my life, so there's negative feelings and going into a negative head space, perhaps. And also, it's the idea of lots of what we come to understand is unsaid or unseen or unspoken. And that idea that, especially with art, the viewer, and with writing, the viewer brings their own story to the work, to a poem, to a book, and so that's the extra bit that the artist didn't put in there because they didn't know what you were going to bring to their work. But it's this other extra piece of the story. Wonderful art, to me, makes the world bigger. It doesn't shut it down. And brilliant writing contains more stories under those layers, in the gaps between the words, the gaps, and the things that aren't said are also there. They're there underneath. If you write the story well, people will know other things that you haven't maybe said. So it's that idea of what's invisible maybe, or what's around the edges of what we see, what's maybe behind or beside it, So a couple of those ideas are in there. Yeah.
and many more. So I would invite you to go and read this book, which is amazing, amazing, amazing. And I'm really sorry, but we will have to stop. But we really want to thank you for having made us enter very briefly into this huge world, that your huge respective worlds that you're working so well into. So thank you very, very much for today. Cristín. And thank you very, very much.
RTE supporting the arts.
Supporting artists.
Supporting us.